Hey guys, I'm Nicole. Thanks for checking out this week's message. At Hope City, we're always so encouraged to hear how God is bringing the hope of Jesus to people through this ministry. If God has used this ministry to bring hope to your life, we would love to hear about it. To share your story, you can email us at lifechange@hopecityonline.net. Also, if you'd like to support this ministry financially, you can simply text any amount to the number below. It is a safe and secure way to support the work God is doing here at Hope City. Now, let's prepare our hearts for a message out of God's Word.
As was already mentioned earlier, we are in the middle of a series. Much bigger than that, we're in the middle of an initiative called Hope for the City, Hope for the World. And here's one of the realities that I've come to the conclusion to as a pastor is that people in general, they want to be for stuff. Like they want to do things for other people. They want to give for the good of others in their city. They want to give for the sake of others around the world. They want to leverage their life and their time for other people. It's not that people don't want to do good, and it's not that people don't want to serve, and it's not that people don't want to be for the people outside the four walls of the church, or maybe even outside the four walls of your home. It's not that we don't have a good heart or have great desires. The reality is, for most people, it's that we don't believe that we're positioned in such a way that we can do a lot for other people. We don't think we're rich enough. We don't think we're advanced enough in life. We don't think that we have enough influence or opportunity. And because of that, consequently, what we end up doing is inadvertently living our life in such a way that we end up taking all for ourselves because we're trying to get further down the road, right? Like we're trying to gain more money. We're trying to gain more influence. We're trying to gain more prestige. We're trying to gain more opportunity. And so what we end up doing is this right here instead of this right here, and we end up taking from rather than giving for the sake of other people. And we don't do that on purpose. The reason that we do it is because we don't feel like we're in the right position. And one of the things that we discovered last week is that all of us, whether we understand it or believe it or see it all the time or not, we are insanely, richly blessed and uniquely positioned to live for the sake of other people because of the time we live in, because of the place we live in. One of the things that we discovered last week is that we're far richer than we thought we were. One of the things that we talked about was the fact that if you make at least $25,000 a year, you're in the top 3% of the richest people in the world. If you showed up here in a car this morning, even though you don't feel rich, if you showed up here in a car this morning, you're in the top 9% of the richest people in the world. Like, we are insanely blessed. But the reason that we don't leverage those blessings, the reason that we're not generous with what we have, it's not because we don't want to be, it's because we don't feel richly blessed. It's because we feel financial pressure. It's because we feel strained. We feel like we've got to meet all these demands and do all this stuff. And the one reason that we feel so much pressure and that we don't feel richly blessed all comes down to one word, and it's this word right here. It's margin. Margin. It's not that we don't make enough. It's that no matter how much we make, we spend it all. And so then we feel the pressure of not having enough. And when we don't have enough, we're not generous with what we have because we're constantly in that mode of taking. Does that make sense? We don't have margin in our lives. We don't have margin with our time. We don't have margin with our finances. We don't have margin in our relationships. And we take everything to the edge. And when we do, we don't feel like that we're positioned. It's not that we don't want to. We don't feel like we're positioned to be generous to people outside of our family or outside of our church. And so when we hear people talking about generosity initiatives, when we hear people talking about giving stuff away, you say, well, that's for somebody else. That can't be for me. But the truth of the matter is, it is for you. You just don't feel like it because you lack margin in your life. Let me prove it to you. The richest that I've ever felt in my life was when I was 16. I was 16. I got my first job. I was working at a fish camp. Now, some of you don't know what a fish camp is. Let me just tell you what a fish camp is. It's a place where they serve seafood, but everything is fried. Now, in later years, they started broiling things for the health nuts, but the reality is everything is fried. And even when they broil things at a fish camp, it's still like in a pool of grease like this big, so nothing is healthy at a fish camp. My first job was at a fish camp. I smelled terrible. I looked terrible, but I felt so rich. And let me tell you why. I made $2.13 an hour, but I made tips. And so those tips were awesome. Like on Fridays and Saturday nights, I would walk out with like 50 or 60 bucks. And so when I walk out of the fish camp with 50 or 60 bucks on a Friday or Saturday night, then on Sunday, I would literally roll into church with like $100 or more than $100 in my pocket. And I didn't have any responsibility with that $100. Like I could have done whatever I wanted with that $100. I could have went to the movies with that $100. I could have taken a girl out with that $100. I could have literally, and I thought about this and I did this, I could have went and bought a truck, a really nice, new, expensive truck that had some big, crazy, like $400 or $500 a month payment on it. And I could have made the payment on that. You know why? Because I had expendable income that I could choose to do whatever I wanted to with, and I felt insanely rich because I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have homeowners insurance. I didn't have these crazy high taxes on everything. I didn't have to pay for my groceries. I didn't have to worry about how I was going to pay for my food. I didn't have to worry about any of those things. So even though I only made 50 or 60 bucks on a given night, I felt insanely rich because none of my money was accounted for. None of my money was already obligated. And in that moment when I was making this much money, I felt far freer than I even do today. And the reason is because I had margin in my finances. There was a gap between what I had and what was needed. The other time that I felt insanely rich was just actually a few months ago. Well, I guess now it's been almost a year ago. My wife and I went to Thailand with Compassion International. And one of the things, many of you guys have heard us tell stories of when we went to Thailand. But one of the things that we did when we got there, very first night, and I think they kind of culture shock you on purpose so that you're brought into the reality of the world in which a lot of these kids live in. They took us to one of the poorest slums in Thailand, and we saw the situations and circumstances that people were living in, like lots and lots of people. There were literally in this one slum, like thousands of people that were piled on top of each other, just trying to get out of the weather, trying to get out of the rain. And in that moment, I realized how blessed I was, because even though I didn't have a lot of excess money in my checking account, even though I didn't have a lot of excess money stored up in savings or in a 401k, even though I wasn't driving the nicest car, even though I didn't have the nicest stuff or was able to do the renovations that I wanted to do to my home, even though I couldn't do all those things, I felt so blessed and so rich in the face of how other people live. And I recognized the reality of how blessed I was. And in those moments, in those brief moments when you're 16 and you got a lot of margin, or when you go and see other people who are less fortunate than you are, you realize in those moments how richly blessed you are. But when we're rolling through the day-to-day grind in our life, when we're rolling through the junk, when we're rolling through the fact that bills are coming in and we've got to get places and we've got to take kids to stuff, when we're dealing with life, we forget how richly blessed we are. And because we forget how richly blessed we are, we don't live as richly blessed people, and we don't intentionally bless others because we're in a take mentality. And the reason that happens more than anything else is because something takes place from the time that we're a kid to the time that we're an adult. It's something I want you to write this down. It's called the migration of hope. The migration of hope. See, when you're a kid, you have hope in something that's bigger than you are because you're out of control. You have no control over anything. And so that's why Jesus talks about coming with childlike faith, because when kids are small, they have no problem believing in something bigger than they are. They have no problem believing in a creator. They have no problem putting their trust and their hope and their faith in a God or a deity or something that's bigger than them. Kids all over the world, no matter what religion or background they come from, kids all too often very quickly latch on to believing in something that's bigger than they are. But here's what happens. As you and I get older, we have a migration of hope. And our hope shifts from putting all of our hope and all of our trust and all of our faith in something that's bigger than us, in God, and it shifts to our stuff. It shifts to what we can accumulate. When we're a kid, our security is in God. But as we get older, our security is how much money we can make, how much stuff we can have, how secure our family can be. Do we have a big enough house? Can we make the mortgage payment? Can we pay the bills? And so we take because our hope is in our ability to make it, to make sure that that we're okay, that our family's okay, that our kids are okay. And we move through this migration of hope where our hope moves from being in God to in our stuff. And inadvertently, without even meaning to, we've become people who are consumed with what we can get because we've placed our hope in our stuff. Even as richly blessed people, we get consumed with what we have. You talk to people and you say, how's it going? It's terrible. Why is it going terrible? Usually it has something to do with a loss of stuff. Something broke at the house and you got to pay to replace it. You lost a job. One of your family members lost a job. You had a cut in pay. How's it going? Terrible. Why is it going terrible? And it usually has something to do with stuff and very little to do with God. You know, the majority of people, when you ask them how they're doing and they say terrible, the reason that they don't say God is because God's never terrible. God never lets people down. God never shortchanges people. God never does that to people. See, when you put your hope in wealth, when you put your hope in stuff, that will let you down. When you put your hope in God, He will never let you down, which is why when you're doing terrible, it usually has nothing to do with God. And so I want to kind of point out something that we alluded to last week as we worked through the text that this entire series is built on. It's found in 1 Timothy chapter 6. If you got your Bibles, I want you to point there because the Apostle Paul addresses this specifically. And again, we breezed over this last week, but I want to go back and look at it one more time. 1 Timothy chapter 6, we're going to be picking it up in verse 17. If you don't have a Bible, the verses are going to be on the screens for you. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. The Apostle Paul says this. Command those who are rich in this present world. That's you and that's me. Again, we may not feel rich, but the reality is we're far more blessed and we have more stuff and we have more opportunity and more capacity than all the people around the rest of the world combined right here in this country. Command those who are rich in this present world. Not to be arrogant, not to make the assumption that you can provide your own happiness, that you can provide your own hope, that if you work enough, if you earn enough, if you do enough, that you'll be able to secure your way in life. Don't be arrogant or put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. We talked about that last week. We talked about how we shouldn't put ourselves in a position where we've got our trust and our hope in our wealth or in our riches, but instead we should put our hope and trust in a God who richly provides, so that when our riches let us down, our hope is still there because He's still there and He will still always come through and provide. The problem is, while that sounds really good and while that preaches really good and while you take lots of notes about that, how the flip do you do that? Like, how do you live that way? Because I would venture to guess, and nobody's going to raise their hands, but if we were to go around the room and ask the question, how many of you completely trust God rather than trusting in your resources? Very few of us could put up our hands 100% and say, we're there. Because the reality is we live in a culture that tells us to trust in what we have rather than trusting in the one who gives us what we have. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that your hope doesn't migrate? Or if it has migrated, how do you get it back to where it needs to be? Well, the Apostle Paul addresses this in the very next verse. He says, I've told you what to do. Now I'm going to tell you how specifically to do it. I'm going to tell you how specifically to live this out. And as I tell you how, I want you to kind of do a gut check and ask the question, do I live this way? Because this is the crux of this entire initiative, the crux of this entire series. He says, command them to do good, not to be good. All Christians are commanded to be good. These are the rich Christians. These are the blessed Christians. These are the Christians who God allows to live at blessed times in human history. Command them to do good, meaning you've got to put feet and faith you got to put action to your faith. You've got to put feet to your beliefs. You've got to go out and do something with what it is that you claim and what it is that you say. Command them to do good, but not just to do good, to be rich in good deeds. Meaning, if you have been richly blessed, it's not going to be okay for you to do a little bit of good, because doing a little bit of good is what other people can do. It's what poor Christians can do. But you've been a blessed Christian. You've been someone who was born at this time in human history. You've been given lots of wealth and lots of opportunity. And I know you don't feel like it, but the reality is all of us have been extremely blessed, whether you feel like it or not. And it's because of margin that we don't feel this way. But this passage applies to you and applies to me. Command them to be rich in good deeds. Don't do a little bit, do a lot of good with what you've been given, because you've been given a lot. And to whom much is given, much is required. Let me tell you why this is so hard for us in the U.S. Because the more money we have, or the more time we have, the more options we have to fill that time up with things that we do for ourselves, to fill that gap up in our financial picture up with things that we do for ourselves, things to make us happy. Our tendency is, when we've got leftover or extra, and everybody knows this is true. Nobody wants to admit it, but everybody knows this is true. Whenever we have extra, our natural tendency is to waste it, to waste the extra that we've been given. You say, no, that's not me. Well, let me just give you a brief example. Did you know that if you work not 40 hours a week, not 50 hours a week, but if you work 60 hours a week, so like take off the table that you work a lot. If you work 60 hours a week and you sleep 8 hours a night, which you don't, but let's just say that you slept 8 hours a night. I know a lot of you didn't sleep 8 hours last night. I can tell by looking at you, right? But let's just say that you work 60 hours a week and you sleep 8 hours a night. Now, I'm not a math person, but I did some math here. Did you know you have 52 hours left in the week outside of working and outside of sleeping to fill it up and do whatever you want to do? 52 hours. That's like watching the Titanic like 20 or 30 times. Like, you can do whatever you want to do with 52 hours, but all too often, many of us who work less than that and who sleep less than that say we don't have enough time, which means that the time that we've got extra of, the time that we've been blessed with. I mean, people around the world, that would blow their mind. It would blow their mind that we live in a world where we can work 5 days for 7 days worth of food. Like, it doesn't work that way around the world. People, if they want 7 days worth of food, they have to work for 7 days worth of food. So they have to work for 7 days. We have these things called weekends that the rest of the world doesn't know anything about. It would blow people's minds if they knew we had 52 extra hours a week and still said, we don't have enough time. And the reason is not because we don't have it. It's not because we're not blessed. It's because we waste it. Which is why the Apostle Paul says this next. And to be generous and willing to share. The temptation, the natural tendency will be for you to take your leftover money, to take your leftover time, to take what you've got in your world as extra, and your tendency will be to waste it. But don't do that. Take that extra and be generous with it. Take that extra and bless somebody else with it. Take that extra and do something outside the four walls of your household, outside the four walls of your church. Go and do something outside in the world and make a difference in the world. Be generous and willing to share. Because when you begin to accumulate wealth, you tend to want to hoard it and hang on to it because it's where your hope will naturally shift to. That's why rich people give less. Now, watch this. They give higher amounts, like they write bigger checks, but they give smaller percentages. And that's what the Apostle Paul is warning against here. Don't get in this habit of giving smaller percentages. Let me just pause right here. And if you don't hear anything else that I say today, if you're not paying attention to anything else, if you're playing Candy Crush and you're not paying attention, like chime in for just a minute. I don't want you to pay attention to this. Go over to your notes app on your phone so you can write this down, because this is really, 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 really important. This is worth the price of admission right here. The issue is not the amount of hours we give. The issue is not the number of dollars we give. The issue really is percentage. percentage. Now, before you jump to conclusions and start going, oh, I see where this is going. This is a tithe message. He tricked us, like he slipped in here. He made us think we were talking about something else, but he's going to talk about tithing, and I didn't want to come to church and hear about tithing, so I'm going back to Candy Crush. No. Hang with me for just a second, because I'm not talking about us. I'm not talking about the local church. I'm just talking about in general. And if you want to classify the local church in this in general in your mind, great. But if that holds you up or messes you up, then throw the local church out of the equation and let's just talk about in general. It's not about the number of dollars that you give away for the sake of other people. It's really about the percentage. Do you really think the creator of the universe, who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, who has everything at his disposal, is concerned or impressed by the number of zeros that you put on the end of a check? He's not. He's not moved by how much you give. He's moved by how sacrificial your gift is. Because the creator of the universe, hear me say this because other pastors will tell you different, and I want you to know the truth. The creator of the universe is not after your money. The creator of the universe is not after your money. He's not after your time. He's after your heart. And the larger the percentage that you give, the more sacrificial it is. The more sacrificial it is, the more of your heart he has. And he's way more interested in getting a hold of your heart and transforming it so that you live different than the rest of the world, so that you can change the rest of the world for his sake and for his glory and for his kingdom. Because if you live like everybody else, if you give like everybody else, if you take like everybody else, nobody's going to want what it is that you have. And he says, I want all of you. I want your heart. And the way I get a hold of your heart is by teaching you to be sacrificial with what you have. What do you have? You have time and you have money. And I want to get a hold of both, not because I need your money and not because I need your time, but because I desperately want your heart. You say, Robbie, where is this? How is this biblical? Well, let me show you. If you've got your Bibles, I want you to flip over to Luke chapter 21, the Gospel of Luke. It's the good news account of the life of Jesus. And in this just very small passage, we're going to see exactly how Jesus explains this or plays this out. Let me give you the context for the story. Jesus is at the temple and he's watching people bring gifts to the temple treasury in order to honor God, in order to please God. They would bring sacrifice and they would bring gifts, monetary gifts to be able to give to the work of the temple. And as all these people are coming in and they're putting in these big gifts, Jesus says these words in Luke chapter 21, picking up in verse 1. As Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Some translations will word this as widow's mites. And did you know that mites, there wasn't even like a translation currency in Roman and Greek culture because that's how small it was? She put in very, very little money. Jesus said this in verse 3. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more. Everybody say that with me. More. I want you to remember this. This is huge. This poor widow has put in more. How does that work? No, she didn't give more. She gave a very, very small number, a very, very small amount. Other people gave more. And Jesus says, no, that's not how it works in my economy. That's not how it works in my kingdom. I'm not interested in the size of the gift. I'm interested in the percentage because I'm interested in the sacrifice because I'm desperately wanting the heart of my people. He said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth. Basically, they kind of had it left over. But she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. God says, listen, amounts don't move me. Percentages do. Let me give you a great example of this. I'm going to kind of let you in on the kind of the inside, the backstory of Hope City Church over the last year to tell you this. Several months ago, we started something kind of behind the scenes. It wasn't a public thing. We didn't really do it in service. It was specific to people who had invested financially in the life of Hope City Church. We started an initiative called the 15 and 15 Initiative. And basically, there's all these things that we feel like that we need to do to be structured and set up to be able to accomplish the goals that God has for us at this church. God's given us a very clear picture and a clear vision of where he's taking this church. And there's some structure stuff that needs to be in place in terms of staffing, in terms of ministry, in terms of expansion. There's things that need to take place to make those things become a reality. And so we gathered together all of our investors, is what I like to call them. All of the people who said, we believe in the mission and vision of Hope City Church, and we're financially investing in that mission. We gathered all those people together. Some couldn't make it, and so we sent them a video, but we gathered all those people together, and we said, here's what we've come to realize. We've come to realize that God wants us to get here, but we're going to have to do these things for us to get here, and to do those things, it's going to cost money. And we know there are people that show up week in and week out that are just testing out the claims of Jesus, that are just checking this thing out, that are just getting their feet wet. And we really don't want to go to those people and like harp on them with money because we don't want to run them off. We don't want to scare them off. We don't want that to be the thing that like rubs them the wrong way and they say, no, I'm done with Jesus. See, they're just after my money. So we gathered all the people who were already invested and we said, did you know, because we did the math and I was blown away by this math. We said, did you know that if everybody who currently gives here, every giving unit, and that's giving unit, that's family, right? Like it's not just a person. If every giving unit would just give $15, not $100, not $50, not $75, $15 more than what they're currently giving, that our budget weekly would go from where it's at to over where it needs to be to accomplish all, not some, not part, but all of the goals that we need to accomplish. And so the challenge was, would you be willing to give $15 more to help advance that cause? That was the request. That was the ask. And let me give you the numbers that are attached to that. At the time when we gave the ask, there was a weekly give here of somewhere in the neighborhood of about $8,000, and the need was about $12,000 a week, so there was about a $4,000 gap. And we were actually going to be able to meet that gap if the people who were already bought in, who were already investing, would give just $15 more. Over the last several months, I've had Chad, our operations director, run some numbers for me. One of the things that I don't get into around here is the money. So if you give money here, I don't know about it. If you don't give money, I don't know about it. And I don't want to know about it. But Chad ran some numbers for me, and it was fascinating to me that of the 500 to 600 people that attend here on any given weekend, we actually only have about 230 to 260 giving units that are consistent, 230 to 260, which means that there's like 350 people who show up that never give anything. And here's what you need to know. This is not about giving. This is not about you giving to the church. Just hang with me for just a second. There's a lot of people who don't give anything. And okay, we recognize that. We know the kind of people that we're reaching. We know the people that aren't bought in. We know the people that are just checking things out, and we want you to know you are more than welcome to continue attending here. But here's what Chad told me that fascinated me, floored me. I had no idea. He said, if all the people who don't give anything would give just a little bit, like all the people who say, I don't have a good job, so I can't give, so I'm not going to write a big, huge check. But if those people who don't have a good job would just give a little bit, just give a percentage of their small check, which would be a small gift, if all those people, watch this, would just give $5, if all those people would just give $5, which means they only make $50 a week if they're giving 10%. So the people who can't afford to really do a lot, right? If all of those people would just give like $5. Remember that gap that we had? Well, if the givers would give $15 more, that gap would be met. If the people who didn't give anything would just give a small percentage, just give a small amount, not only would that gap be met, but it would be exceeded, watch this, by $3,000. Here's what that tells me. God can do big things with small gifts, which means nobody in this room is exempt from this teaching of Jesus. Nobody. You say, I don't have a good job right now. I make like $30 a week. Well, then guess what? Following the biblical model, you've got $3 that you could give to something outside of yourself. Well, I only make $300 a week. You have $30 that you could give if you were to set aside that number. Let's just say you started at 10%, which is a good one. That's what the Bible teaches. If we would make the decision to stop making excuses for generosity and instead start being generous, God would open up the heavens and enable us to accomplish far greater than we could ever accomplish on our own through our faithfulness. God could take all these tiny little gifts and do unbelievable things through it. God can do so much more with your money than you can do with it. And when you choose to be generous with what you have, all of a sudden God starts taking the little bit that you have and using it to do kingdom-sized things. Now just pause for a second, because I know there's a lot of you that are like, you said you weren't going there. You said this wasn't going to be about giving to the church. I'm not talking about the church. If you want to give your gifts to the church, God bless you, give to the church. I think it's a great place to give. I think this is a great place that you can give through, not to, that we're a conduit for things that are happening in this community and for life change in the world, around the world. I'll be the first one to tell you I love giving to this place because I know where the dollars and cents goes. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about making the conscious decision to leverage what you have for the sake and the benefit of other people outside of yourselves, and doing it with the trust that God can do more with your little bit that you have available to give than you can do if you kept it. And that's exactly what he's talking about. He's saying this widow, she gave so much more. It wasn't a lot in dollars and cents, but she gave me her heart. And I took what she gave. And watch this. I did unbelievable things in her, and I did unbelievable things through her, because she made the decision to be sacrificially generous. So here's my challenge to this church, and we're living this out throughout the course of this series. We're asking you to bring and to give stuff every single week. You say, well, that's going to scare people off, right? Well, that's okay. We want you to bring stuff. We want to think outside of ourselves. We want to live outside of ourselves. We want to live for the sake and the betterment of other people, to expand God's kingdom and bring the hope for our city and the hope for our world, and not just experience the hope for ourselves. And so we're living this out throughout the course of this series, but here's the tangible, specific next step takeaway that I want you to decide to do. I want you to pre-decide what you're going to do. Pre-decide what you're going to do with your resources. See, some of you are going, I don't have a job at all right now, so this message doesn't apply to me. No, it totally applies to you, because I want you to pre-decide. Pre-decide. That means you don't decide when the opportunity comes, you decide before the opportunity comes. That's what pre means. Pre-decide. You say, well, I don't make enough right now. That's okay, I want you to pre-decide. I want you to pre-decide, watch this, what percentage of your income you're going to choose to leverage to give away to other people outside of yourself, so that you are intentionally, as someone who lives in a very blessed time, who is richly blessed, doesn't get caught up in take, consume. I want you to pre-decide what percentage of your income you're going to give away, and then give that to whoever you want to give it to. Again, I love this church, and I think it's a great place to give it, but I want you to make the conscious decision to give that percentage of your income away. Let me tell you what my wife and I decided to do, and I got 2 minutes, and I got to get you guys out of here. Let me tell you what my wife and I decided to do several years ago. We made the conscious decision that we were going to choose to live off of 80% of our income. You may say, well, that's great for y'all. That doesn't work in my world, right? No, here's the deal. It does work. It does work. Because when you choose to live off of 80% instead of 100%, what you're saying is, God, I trust you with my money more than I trust me with my money. So I'm not going to live off of 100% where I'm in control of all of my money. I'm going to live off of 80%, and I'm not going to be able to afford to pay my bills. Nicole talked about this last week. I'm not going to be able to have all the extras. I'm not going to be able to do the things that I thought that I wanted to do or could do. But you know what? You're going to come through, and I'm going to learn to trust you in the process, and I'm going to live the way that you want me to live, and I'm going to be generous because you have richly blessed me. And all of a sudden, God shows up and shows his power and his faithfulness and his favor in the midst of his economy, instead of you trying to live it out in yours. We decided that we were going to live off of 80%. Did it work on paper? Absolutely not. Did we struggle? Yes. Did checks start flowing in the mail? Did miracle dollars start falling out of the sky? Nope. Was it a struggle for years? Yes. Was it a difficult transition? Absolutely. Would I take it back? Not a chance. You know why? Because we've consciously made the decision now to live off of 80%, to live with margin in our lives, and to save 10%. And to give 10%, And now that number has actually gone up. Now we're living off of less than 80%. But when we made this decision, we said we were going to live off of 80%, save 10%, and give 10%. You know what has happened in our lives? Yes, we've had to make payment arrangements, and yes, we've had to take calls from bill collectors, and yes, we've had to deal with stuff. But when the tire blows on the car now, guess what? I got money to pay for it. You know why? Because I started saving and having margin in my life. When somebody comes up and says, hey, I'm not going to be able to make my power bill this month. Can you help? I have the ability to say yes because I've taken money that I've set aside for the purposes of kingdom work, and I'm able to help. I'm able to do things that I never thought I'd be able to do, and I still don't make a ton of money. But I'm able to do far more than I could have ever done on my own because I've pre-decided to live off of a certain amount and to leverage and to give and be generous with a certain amount. And here's why I want you to pre-decide. Because if you wait until you get the job, if you wait until you buy that house and do your budget, if you wait until, guess what? You'll pre-decide the wrong number. And as you gain more wealth, your percentage number will go down. You'll write bigger checks, but you'll give smaller percentages. I want you to pre-decide now. When you make $10,000 a year that you're going to give 10% of your income away. So that when you make $100,000 a year, you're still giving at least 10% of your income away. And God's doing far more through you than you ever thought he could because you pre-decided no matter how much you made, you were going to leverage a percentage to give away. You were going to live with margin so that you had the capacity and the ability to live out this passage in Timothy, to be generous and willing to share with others. Pre-decide how big the margin is going to be. And then do something about it. Start living it. You know what we had to do? And I'm just confession and I'll close with this. We had to make the decision that we were going to have that money drafted out of our account every month, right when I got paid. You know why? Because I'm a stingy joker, right? I would see a pair of jeans that I wanted, and I'd say, well, we'll give a little bit more next time, but right now we're going to buy these jeans, right? So you know what I started doing? I started pre-deciding that money was going to come out so that I didn't have the option. Now, some people, that's not your bag, but we did. We set it up online to where it automatically comes out of our account when we give to Hope City or give to the Gate Pregnancy Center or give to our Compassion Child. We have that stuff drafted out of our account so that we don't make the decision to choose not to write the check because we have pre-decided. And I want to challenge you as someone who's been richly blessed. Pre-decide to live with margin and do it. Because when you do, it will uproot selfishness in your heart and in your life. It will create a spirit of generosity, and people will say, what is it that you have? And you know what you'll be able to say? I have the Spirit of Jesus inside me who sacrificed everything he had. He pre-decided on me. He bet the farm on my soul. And because of that, I'm living with the same kind of generosity in my time, in my finances, in my relationships, with my kids, with my family. I've got the Spirit of Jesus in me. Let me tell you about him. And you'll be able to make kingdom difference in the world. So, it's a better way to live. It's the only way to live. And it's how we make a tangible difference in the world around us. Pre-decide. Wives, husbands, you're going to hate me. Wives, get in the car, nudge him. Say, all right, let's have the conversation. Let's pre-decide. Because he won't bring it up. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, we're not bringing it up. Nudge him, say, let's pre-decide and do something about it. God, we love you and we thank you for the fact that you've been so generous to us. We ask that we would reciprocate that generosity and live with your heart and your spirit and your fingerprint in our lives so that the world, when they see us, they don't see us, they see you. May we tangibly pre-decide how we're going to live generously for your sake, for your kingdom, for your cause. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.